My name is Elias Vance. For most of my life, I've been a cultivator, not of land, though I have done my share of that, but of ideas. I believe that with enough care, enough patience, and the right conditions, even the most fallow ground can be coaxed into producing something of value, something that nourishes. It's a philosophy I learned from my grandfather, a man who could make roses bloom from the rocky soil of our small family plot, and one I carried with me when I moved to the old port city of Alden for 7 years. That philosophy was embodied in Hearth Garden, an urban farming initiative I built from the ground up. We transformed forgotten rooftops and vacant lots into thriving green spaces, providing fresh produce and a sense of connection for communities that had been overlooked for decades. Hearth Garden wasn't just a business. It was a belief system made tangible. It was my life's work, my quiet contribution to the world. And 3 years ago, I lost it. Now, I live with my wife, Lena, in a small but light-filled apartment in the city's historic district. The brick walls are old and worn, and the windows look out over a cobbled street where the gas lamps still flicker on at dusk. Lena is a librarian, a keeper of stories, and a woman whose quiet strength has been the bedrock of my life. She has a way of listening that makes you feel truly heard, and her presence is the calm center of my world. Lena is also the reason I once called Julian Croft my best friend. He looked at me across the vast, polished expanse of his late father's desk, the mahogany gleaming under the recessed lighting of the corner office. His expression was one of practiced sympathy, a mask worn so often it had begun to meld with the skin. He said the words as if he were granting me a gentle mercy, releasing me from a burden I didn't know I was carrying. "We don't hire failures like you, Elias." I didn't flinch. The initial shock was a cold, smooth stone dropping through my chest, leaving no ripple on the surface. I simply nodded, my gaze steady on his. "I understand perfectly." A small, self-satisfied smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the smile of a man who had never once in his life doubted his own position. A man who stood on ground he hadn't cleared and in a house he hadn't built. It was the condescending smile of inherited power. He believed that was the end of it. He believed he had won. But that sentence, spoken in the quiet, hallowed space of his father's office, didn't sting me with the venom he intended. It did something else entirely. It ignited a flicker of light in a part of my soul that had been dark for 3 years. It was not a flame of anger or a thirst for revenge. It was the cool, clear light of purpose. I wasn't there for a job. I never would have worked for him, for his company. I was there because, after months of my tentative, foolish attempts to reconnect with the man who had been my brother, he had finally invited me. I had thought it was an olive branch. I see now it was a summons for a public execution with an audience of 2. I walked out of the gleaming glass tower of Croft and Son Mercantile, my steps calm and measured. I walked past the portraits of his father and grandfather in the lobby, their painted eyes seeming to follow me with a shared sense of disappointment. I walked out into the crisp autumn air of Alden, but I did not walk away empty-handed. He had given me a gift far more valuable than any job. He had given me clarity. His name is Julian Croft. He is my wife's brother, and for a decade, he was the closest thing I had to a soulmate. We met in university, 2 young men fueled by different kinds of ambition. Mine was the slow, steady burn of wanting to build something lasting. His was the wildfire of wanting to be something, to arrive at a destination without having to walk the road. I remember him sleeping on the worn corduroy couch in my tiny off-campus apartment, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling above him. He was broke then, but his pride was a fortress. He would never have told anyone, but he told me. I was the one who helped him dissect dense economic theories, who edited his first clumsy business proposals until they shone, who rebuilt his resume from a scattered list of summer jobs into a narrative of potential. We were a 2-man army against the world's indifference. He used to call me his mirror. He'd say it late at night, over cheap beer and dreams that felt impossibly large. "You reflect the man I want to become, Eli," he'd say. Steady, clear. You see the foundation of things. It's a funny thing about mirrors. They don't just reflect the present. They hold the memory of everything they've ever seen. When I married Lena, he stood as my best man. His toast was beautiful, full of warmth and shared history, and there were real tears in his eyes as he raised his glass to us. He was my brother then, in every way that mattered. 3 years ago, that brother vanished. Hearth Garden, my dream, my 7 years of sweat and soil, collapsed. A larger agricultural conglomerate initiated a hostile takeover. A bloodless corporate maneuver that left me with nothing but debt and the hollow ache of a lost purpose. It was a public failure, chronicled in the local business journal. And in the deafening silence that followed, Julian was gone. No calls, no texts, not a single word. The hand that I had pulled up so many times was not there to steady me when I fell. I should have understood then. But grief is a fog, and hope is a stubborn fool. For the past 2 months, I had been reaching out, trying to rebuild the bridge he had so silently burned. I thought the shared history, the bond we had forged, had to count for something. Today's invitation was the culmination of that effort, the final, brutal answer to my outreach. I should have seen the truth much earlier, in the small, casual cruelties I had mistaken for brotherly teasing. The faint, smug curl of his lip at family dinners whenever my name came up. The way he'd consistently downplayed my achievements. When Hearth Garden secured its first major city grant, he'd called it beginner's luck. When it failed, he'd murmured that it was inevitable for such a niche, idealistic venture. The slow corrosion of jealousy had been happening for years, quietly, invisibly, like rust spreading beneath a coat of paint. That sentence, "We don't hire failures like you," wasn't the beginning of his betrayal. It was simply the moment the rust finally broke through to the surface. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. I lay beside Lena, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm in the dark, and stared at the ceiling. The shadows cast by the streetlights looked like sprawling, intricate maps. I wasn't replaying Julian's words with anger. I was replaying them with a kind of forensic calm, fitting them into the larger story of our friendship, our brotherhood, and its quiet, painful dissolution. I remembered all the things I had done for him, not as a ledger of debts, but as a blueprint of a structure we had built together, a structure he had abandoned and left to decay. And then, slowly, a new plan began to form in my mind. It was not a plan for revenge. Had been a man of integrity. I had known him, respected him. He had built Croft and Son Mercantile from a small, local supplier into a regional institution. That a business should be a force for good. Julian had inherited the company, but not the philosophy. He was a caretaker, not a cultivator, and under his watch, in particular, were men I knew well from my days seeking investment for Hearth Garden. Arthur Finch was the first, an older gentleman, a contemporary of Julian's father, who valued legacy and stability above all else. A few years ago, Arthur's own son had faced a quiet but serious professional scandal, an ethical lapse that could have ended his career. I had been in a position to know about it, and out of respect for Arthur, I had ensured it remained a private matter, offering guidance to the son and my silence to the world. I had done it without any thought of repayment. It was simply the right thing to do. But a debt of honor, I knew, was something a man like Arthur Finch would never forget. The second was Maria Santos. She was younger, pragmatic, a sharp-minded investor who had joined the board after Mr. Croft's passing. She was driven by growth and opportunity. I knew she was quietly frustrated with Julian's leadership, with his focus on maintaining the status quo rather than innovating. I also knew she was looking to fund a promising new venture in sustainable logistics, a field I understood intimately. I began to move, not with the heat of anger, but with the quiet patience of a gardener preparing the soil. I scheduled a lunch with Arthur at an old, wood-paneled club downtown, a place that smelled of leather and history. We spoke of his father, of the city, of the changing times. I didn't threaten or blackmail. I spoke of legacy. I spoke of the slow erosion of his old friend's life's work under Julian's aimless leadership. I spoke of stewardship, of the responsibility we have to protect the things we value. I didn't need to mention his son. I just gently reminded him of the kind of man I was, and the kind of man his friend had trusted. I saw the understanding dawn in his wise, tired eyes. I pointed out the stagnating growth, the missed opportunities, the inefficiencies that were a clear sign of passive, uninspired leadership. Then, I changed the subject. I offered to connect her with, and personally invest alongside her in, the very logistics startup she was so keen on. It was a strategic alliance, a partnership that would be mutually beneficial. The only condition was her support for a necessary leadership change at Croft & Son. Money talked, But this was a conversation, not a transaction. Next, I dug deeper into the company's operations. I hired a small, discreet team of forensic accountants, people I trusted. I wasn't looking for the kind of spectacular fraud that would land Julian in jail. Self-serving inefficiencies that are the hallmark of a man who is running a company he did not build and does not truly understand. It was all there, just as I had suspected. I compiled the findings into a dossier. It was not a weapon of character assassination. It was a clear, dispassionate report on the health of the business. A vote of no confidence in the CEO required a 2/3 majority of the board. Normally, it would be an impossible hurdle, but I knew my ground was prepared. It took 3 weeks. It was all done with a gentle hand. There were no threats, no ultimatums, just a series of quiet, compelling arguments for a better future, for the restoration of a legacy. Last night, the board of Croft and Son Mercantile held an emergency, closed-door meeting. They voted unanimously to remove Julian Croft as CEO. They named me interim CEO, effective immediately. This morning, he walked into the office building that bore his family name like a king returning to his castle. He wore the same expensive suit, the same confident smirk. But the world around him had changed while he slept. The receptionist, who usually greeted him with a bright, deferential smile, simply nodded, her eyes downcast. His executive secretary, the doors swinging open with his entitled momentum. He was expecting a joke, a prank, some misunderstanding he could dismiss with a wave of his hand. He stopped dead in the middle of the room when he saw me. I was sitting behind his father's desk. My hands were steepled on the polished mahogany, my wedding ring, a simple gold band, catching the morning light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, he just stared, his mind refusing to process the scene before him. The smirk faltered, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending confusion. "You're in my chair," he finally said, his voice a low growl. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with a quiet. His eyes flickered down to the file, then back to my face, searching for the lie, for the punchline. Finding none, he slowly reached out and opened it. He flipped through the pages. The accountant's reports on financial leaks. The data on high staff turnover in key departments. The analysis of missed expansion opportunities. The signed board meeting minutes. The final, unanimous vote. His hands began to tremble. I watched him closely, dispassionately. I saw the exact moment the truth landed, the moment the inherited crown of his confidence cracked and fell away, revealing the frightened, insecure man beneath. You manipulated them," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy. I tilted my head slightly. "No, Julian. I simply showed them the truth they were already feeling but were too polite, or too loyal to your father's memory, to admit aloud." He leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk, his knuckles white. The old, familiar arrogance flared for a moment, fueled by desperation. "You think this makes you better than me?" he hissed, his voice shaking with a rage that was really just fear. I rose slowly from the chair, a chair that now felt both profoundly heavy and perfectly right. I looked at him, the boy I had mentored, the man who had called me his brother, the failure who now stood defeated before me. "No, Julian," I said softly. "I know it does." He looked around the room then, at the walls adorned with awards his father had won, at the breathtaking view of the city his father had helped to build, at the empire he had not earned but had pretended to rule. Down the same long corridor I had walked just weeks ago. His head was down. His steps were silent. Except this time, there was no one to offer him a gentle, "I understand." Later that evening, long after the last employee had gone home, I stood alone in the quiet of the corner office. The city of Alden spread out below me, a tapestry of glittering lights. My phone buzzed. It was Lena. "I warned him, you know," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Years ago, I told him not to mistake your kindness for weakness." "I know," I said, my voice a little rough. There was a pause. I watched the traffic flow like rivers of light through the city streets. I looked at the building I now controlled, the place from which I had been so callously dismissed. The turning of the tide, the quiet erosion of a mountain, are silent. Some men build their legacy with loud proclamations and grand gestures. Others, I have learned, build it with silence, with patience, and with the steady, quiet work of tending to what matters. My first day as the steward of Croft and Son was not marked by sweeping changes or dramatic announcements. Dedicated people who had kept the gears of the company turning despite the lack of direction from the top. I didn't talk about a new vision. I asked them about the old one. I asked them what they loved about working for the elder Mr. Croft, what principles they felt had been lost, what they needed to do their best work. In the afternoon, I met with Arthur Finch and Maria Santos in the boardroom. The dossier lay between us on the long, polished table. The inefficiencies are significant, Maria said, tapping a finger on the accountant's summary. But they're fixable. This isn't rot in the foundation, it's neglect. The company has good bones. It has my friend's soul, Arthur added, his voice heavy with emotion. That's what matters. That's what I hope you can restore, Elias. That is my intention, I told them. This isn't about a hostile takeover. It's about a restoration. I want to bring this company back to the principles your father, Julian, established. Quality, integrity, and a commitment to this community. I spent the next few weeks in a state of quiet, intense focus. My work was not about demolition, but about careful renovation. We streamlined bloated supply chains, renegotiated contracts that were based on cronyism rather than value, and reinvested the savings into employee training and much-needed technological upgrades. I unearthed projects Julian had shelved because they required too much effort or long-term vision, and I brought them back to life. One of these was a partnership with local artisans to feature their goods in the Mercantile's flagship store, a project Julian's father had championed but Julian had dismissed as small time. I met with the artisans myself, listened to their stories, and created a prominent, beautifully designed space for them in the store. It became an instant success, drawing in new customers and reconnecting the company with its local roots. Throughout this time, there was a ghost in the machine, Julian. He was, legally, still a significant shareholder. Lena was torn. He was her brother, and despite his failings, she loved him. He won't talk to me, she told me one evening, her voice laced with sadness as we sat on our small balcony. The city air cool around us. He thinks I chose you over him. You didn't have to choose, I said, taking her hand. He was the one who drew the line in the sand. I know, she sighed. But he's still my brother. I worry about him, Eli. I felt a pang of something complex, not guilt, but a heavy sense of responsibility. I had not acted to destroy him, but my actions had resulted in his destruction. The distinction felt important, but perhaps only to me. About 2 months into my tenure, I made a decision. After a long moment, the door opened a crack. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was still in what looked like pajamas, though it was the middle of the afternoon. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. What do you want? He asked, his voice rough. I want to talk, I said simply. He stared at me for a moment. Then, he finally turned to look at me, a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. You have no right to talk to me about my father. I have every right, I countered, my voice still quiet. He was my friend, too. He was my mentor. He believed in me when my own venture failed. He saw value in my work. The least I can do is honor his memory by protecting what he created. I pulled a single folder from my briefcase and placed it on the table in front of him. This is a proposal, I said. It's for the creation of the Croft Foundation, a charitable arm of the company. The kind of things your father cared about. The kind of things Hearthgarden tried to do. He stared at the folder, not touching it. I want you to run it, I said. His head snapped up. Something your father would have been proud of. This foundation would be your legacy, not one you inherited, but one you build yourself, from the ground up. He was silent for a long, long time, his eyes searching my face for some trick, some hidden angle. He found none. There was no trick. It was a genuine offer, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Why? He finally whispered. After everything, why would you do this for me? I thought for a moment, seeking the truest answer. Because you were my friend, I said. And because Lena loves her brother. And because I believe that everyone, even someone who has failed spectacularly, deserves a chance to cultivate a better future. I left the folder on his table and walked out of his house, leaving him alone with his choice. I didn't know if he would take it. It was no longer up to me. I had planted the seed. Whether it grew or withered was entirely in his hands. 6 months later, I stood on a rooftop in one of Alden's most neglected neighborhoods. It was a brisk spring morning. and the air was filled with the smell of damp earth and new beginnings. All around me, volunteers were building raised garden beds, turning a barren, tarred roof into what would soon be a thriving green space. It was the first official project of the Croft Foundation. I saw him across the rooftop, directing a group of teenagers on how to assemble a compost bin. Julian looked different. He was thinner, his face was weathered from being outdoors, and he was wearing work boots and dirt-stained jeans. He was smiling, a genuine, unforced smile as he patiently explained the science of decomposition. He looked purposeful. He saw me watching and walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Elias," he said, his greeting simple, his gaze direct. "Julian," I replied. "It looks good. You're doing good work here." "It's the hardest work I've ever done," he admitted with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "And the best." "Thank you." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of everything that had passed between us. It was an apology, an acknowledgement, and a statement of a new reality. "You're the one doing the work," I said. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the garden take shape. The city of Alden sprawled around us, a mix of old brick and new glass, a city in constant transition, just like the people who lived in it. "You know," he said, not looking at me, but at the skyline. "My father, he always said the measure of a man wasn't whether he fell, but how he chose to get up." I never really understood what he meant until recently. "He was a wise man," I said. "Yes, he was." He finally turned to face me. "The mirror, you remember that? You're not my mirror anymore, Eli. I think, for the first time, I'm finally starting to see my own reflection." He offered me his hand, his palm rough and calloused. I took it. We shook hands, not as rivals, not as CEO and humbled former executive, but as two men who had found their way back to a different, more honest kind of brotherhood, built not on youthful ambition, but on the hard-won soil of forgiveness and a shared purpose. My story isn't one of vengeance. It is a story of reclamation. I reclaimed a company for the sake of a legacy. I reclaimed a friendship from the ashes of betrayal. And in the process, I reclaimed myself from the identity of a failure. I learned that sometimes the most profound way to win isn't to defeat your enemy, but to offer them a path to becoming a better version of themselves. Because true, lasting growth isn't about what you conquer.